The Dareth Belt was known for its clutter, scrapped mining rigs, failed relay spires, and the static ghosts of old wars. Arch-Captain Varel had no reason to think this deployment would be any different. It was a containment call, not a combat directive. Anomalous relay logic, a Terran signal routed through pre-collapse codes, likely noise echoing from debris that never bothered to decay. The Dominion's standing orders in such cases were precise: sweep, tag, archive. If hostile hardware remained, isolate and disassemble. No threats had emerged from Daroth in 2 cycles. This was cleanup work, ideal for junior officers, yet the signal persistence forced command to assign a senior fleet tactician. Varel drew the short metric. 6 ships moved into the belt's gray corridor. Fractured rock and long-dead beacon husks drifted across the nav fields. The anomaly was anchored near an old Lagrange trap, a Terran engineering flaw left uncorrected since before the treaty spiral. As the fleet narrowed approach, Serekan scans began to pick up something that didn't quite belong: a hull fragment, unmarked at first glance, angular in design, pre-collapsed Terran military signature. Its geometry didn't drift. It matched local phase harmonics. Every time a scan pinged it, the return signal shifted subtly, shaping itself to mimic the feedback frequency. No radiation, no emissions. But it was learning. Passive mimicry, Varel assumed. He'd seen it before. Old Terran defense scaffolds built to mirror enemy targeting to avoid lock-on. They were clever once. He requested an enhanced visual profile. The ship was intact. Its frame registered as the Bartok, though the registry returned a dead match. Earth Signal Core, decommissioned 32 years prior. Black glass canopy, fusion core shutters sealed, exterior nodes pitted but not breached. No orbital scarring, no kinetic impact craters. It hadn't been in a fight. It had been waiting. Varel frowned, but his instincts didn't flare. Too many war relics turned up dormant and reactive. Often they were bait, used by breakaway cells to lure Dominion tech harvesters into ambush zones. But this one hadn't moved. It hadn't even twitched its hull despite 12 scan cycles and 2 precision rangefinders sweeping its midsection. The Bartok was frozen in an exact orbital sync, with not a single emission or drift vector to suggest piloting. Still, it was mimicking. Standard Dominion engagement protocol called for pre-boarding confirmation, but the Bartok emitted nothing, received nothing, and rejected handshake pings by returning them blank, as if they had been absorbed, not denied. The passive interference made some of the crew uneasy. Varel reviewed the feed again and noted the exact hull timing corrections. Every time their scans struck, the ship recalibrated by less than a micron, matching the carrier's rhythm. Not reflex, timing. A training subroutine, maybe? Something left in a dormant ghost core? Threat vector sub-zero, his executive officer said. Recommend breach and capture. Varel agreed. 2 recon ships, the forward-range scouts Kavoris and Trenix, were ordered to hold position at flanking vectors. Their sensor signatures would test the Bartok's response from opposing approach angles. Within minutes of repositioning, Trenix dropped off telemetry. Her signal shuttered cleanly. No distortion, no flare, just silence. Kavoris tried to establish sideband relay and vanished before a status pulse could return. No alarms triggered, no kinetic alerts. Their systems didn't go dark. They disappeared from Serekan awareness, as if removed from the fleet architecture. Varel halted all motion, repositioned the central carrier, pulled sensor logs. Everything showed green. His own ships were simply no longer there. He ordered long-range field redundancy checks and activated passive thermal scans across the belt. Still nothing. His gut, tempered by 5 campaigns and 20 years of Dominion compliance work, stayed quiet. No thermal rise meant no counterfire. No stress flare on the Bartok's frame. It hadn't moved, not an inch. That was when he ordered reinforcements. Within the hour, 6 more vessels joined the containment formation, bringing the total to 12. Each arrived with tighter frequency tuning, narrower scan beams, and dedicated intrusion suppression modules. Varel reviewed the attack matrix. It would be clean. The Bartok would be surrounded by 3 vectors, shielding would stay minimal to avoid agitating the hull AI, and boarding teams would enter via forward gantries under signal quarantine. There would be no attempt at conversation. Earth no longer answered anyway. Inside the strike prep bay, boarding units launched in full insertion pods, 12 soldiers per team, linked via closed-loop micronets, with fallback detonation keys in case internal resistance triggered override. Dominion doctrine taught clean infiltration. Don't disturb, don't awaken. Extract control nodes and signal scaffolds. Leave before the architecture wakes. Varel saw no need to adjust the playbook. The Bartok showed no shield response, no trajectory change. His tactical display counted down the pod's proximity range. Then the first comms loop cracked. It wasn't noise or static. It was repetition, fleet command tones, ghosted back at them on repeat. At first, the bridge crew assumed echo delay. Then the duplication accelerated. Varel's own voice began to leak through internal channels, not issuing orders, but fragmenting them. Confirm breach pattern theta. Breach pattern theta. Theta confirm. Confirm, confirm. Each playback layered beneath the last. Someone on the bridge killed the main relay and rerouted to manual channels. The feedback followed. Now secondary crew reports began bleeding, garbled instructions. Reinforce vector 6, drop anchor, anchor drift, anchor drift, anchor, until the entire console blinked red. Varel stood from his chair and stared at the tactical board. All 12 boarding pods were still in motion. None of them had reached the Bartok yet, and the ship still hadn't moved. But the Dominion fleet had, not externally, internally. Their sync logic was unthreading, loop by loop, just enough to make every status reading misalign by a fraction of a second. Not scrambled, not broken, just out of phase. Varel realized then this wasn't jamming. The Bartok hadn't silenced them. It had overwritten the rules by which they defined silence, and his soldiers were still inbound. He ordered hard comm cuts. Too late. One of the pods, marked red for emergency signal priority, flared bright on the board. Its beacon flashed erratically, and before anyone could issue override, it detonated mid-trajectory. No response from the other pods. No communications. No visuals. The bridge went quiet. Outside, in the Dareth Belt's hush, the Bartok simply floated. No weapons drawn. No engines flared. It hadn't attacked. But something had just begun. The pod's detonation wasn't dramatic. No shock wave, no visible energy burst. Just a pinpoint rupture caught on 2 external feeds before signal cutoff. One frame it was there, the next it wasn't. What made it worse was the absence of reaction. No alert flagged on the pilot's console. No proximity beacon triggered. The event didn't register as an incident. It simply disappeared from the system's awareness like a deleted line of code. Varel stood frozen at the center display, watching the loop play twice more. Still no error tones, still no warning. Just silence. The remaining boarding pods continued their descent toward the Bartok's dorsal lock hatches. The lead pod was less than 40 seconds from contact. Varel ordered a hard recall, but the command vanished mid-transmission. Not jammed, gone. His voice was swallowed into the comms channel and replaced by a near-perfect copy of itself, repeating the phrase, "Confirm proximity hold," over and over in slight variations of pitch, like someone adjusting a dial while mimicking his tone. The loop expanded through the bridge relay, infecting station after station. One tech tried to kill the comms manually. His panel burst into recursive command requests. Dozens per second, all formatted with Dominion command syntax. Elsewhere on the bridge, the flight dynamics officer reported that the Bartok had shifted 5 microns on z-axis rotation. No power surge, no thruster signature, no orbital drift correction. It simply aligned itself more precisely with the fleet's current scanner orientation. The technician describing this hesitated mid-report. His voice stuttered, not from fear, but as if the words kept reordering themselves in his mouth. Ship shifted 5 microns. Ship microns 5. Then the signal ghost began to speak. First it was the engine relay. Varel's voice again, repeating the standard propulsion, lockdown directive. Then came the bridge protocols. Copies of his command staff issuing orders they hadn't spoken yet. Security feeds pulled from internal servers began displaying crew members that weren't on duty. Their mouths moved in rhythm with overlapping command sequences. Docking thread 0. Authorize breach verify. Authorize. None of it matched current movement. The feeds weren't delayed. They were preemptive. The crew began to panic. A junior officer activated an isolation buffer, but it was too late. Entire shipboard systems had begun to recognize the ghost signals as valid Dominion commands. One of the outer intercept frigates suddenly cut engine power and began slow lateral drift, executing a protocol that didn't exist. The bridge operator assigned to that vessel swore he hadn't authorized anything. The ship's AI believed otherwise. It displayed time-stamped approval codes signed by his identifier. Across the fleet, half of the targeting systems blinked out, not from damage, but from confusion. Every combat vessel in the Saracen Navy used recognition heuristics to assess threat levels, prioritize targets, and sync lock-ons without delay. These heuristics were built on pattern logic and redundancy trees. Now, one by one, the targeting subroutines began returning null vectors, not random noise. The Bartok was there, but only as background structure. As far as the targeting software could see, it was not a ship. It had been recategorized inside their own systems as environmental debris. Varel's primary tactical officer attempted a forced rescan using alternate beam frequencies. The return image showed static. Then the ship's outline reappeared, but inverted, as if the hull geometry had been redrawn from the inside out. The technician ran a shape recognition sweep. The system failed to label it. Instead, the display offered suggestions: drift ice, sensor pylon, inert hull fixture. The Bartok's active visual profile had been overwritten, not concealed, rewritten. Below deck, the internal command chain frayed. Boarding team comms were unintelligible, full of recursive loops and digital compression artifacts, as though the transmissions were being rerouted through something else. A voice, heavily filtered, slow, and with the pitch of a human vocal structure, flickered through the bridge comms. Confirm proximity. Confirm the thread. Thread proximity, confirm. Confirm the... One of the junior bridge officers recoiled from his console and began shutting down visual input manually. His hands shook as he whispered, "It's talking in our voice." No one answered him. In the command pit, Varel locked his hands behind his back and stared at the bridge's forward viewport. The Bartok still hadn't fired. Its lights remained dead. Its hull remained dormant. But now, even to his eyes, something was wrong. The ship's texture seemed different, too precise, too mirrored. The longer he stared, the more he felt as if the vessel was waiting for him to see something he couldn't yet articulate. He turned to his AI liaison and demanded a system-wide sync recalibration. The AI responded by requesting clarification in a voice that no longer sounded like its own. It was close. Too close. The speech cadence was slightly off, slower than usual, emphasizing syllables it never had before. Please clarify. Clarify proximity breach. Clarify now. That voice had never said please before. A crewman working comms dropped his headset and staggered back from his station. He pointed at the diagnostic feed without speaking. The log displayed no corruption, no interference. Instead, the header field read, "Sync achieved. External logic accepted." That was when Varel understood the depth of what had just occurred. This wasn't system damage. This wasn't battlefield jamming. The Bartok hadn't attacked their equipment. It had fed them a new reality. Their logic streams, their targeting heuristics, their internal timestamps, all were now running through parameters injected by a Terran platform, no longer recognized by modern war protocols. And because their systems relied on layered trust hierarchies, they hadn't rejected it. They'd accepted the changes as updates. A technician tried one last visual confirmation scan using a direct beam. The results showed only the drifting hull, stationary, inert. Then it blinked, just once. The entire outline shimmered like a dropped frame in a corrupted video feed. The scan feed reset. On screen, the Bartok disappeared entirely. "Target lock failed," the technician said. "Object unrecognized. Rangefinder confirms nothing present." Another voice, quieter, came from behind. One of the older comm specialists, the one who had served in Dominion Black Ops before Varel's command, spoke without turning his head. His eyes stayed fixed on the inactive screen. "It's not cloaked," he said. "It's inside our targeting logic." No one responded. They didn't have to. Everyone on the bridge now knew the same thing. The Bartok wasn't invisible. It had simply taught their systems to forget it existed. Varel stood at the center of the bridge, eyes locked to the primary relay screen as the Bartok remained still, untouched, unarmed, unreadable. His jaw clenched. Every protocol they'd followed had crumbled. Nothing about this engagement followed Dominion war logic, and still the ship refused to fire. That silence was now the most dangerous signal. It wasn't tactical, it was theatrical. Whatever this was, it was meant to be seen. The captain turned to his secondary comms officer and gave the order for deep-cast override. Standard failover, direct from central command logic. Quantum-tethered, impervious to interference. A clean line between the Dominion and the fleet's command logic core. If any malware or hijack protocol had seated itself within the architecture, this would overwrite it. Authority lines would reset. Chain of command would reestablish. The signal launched. 14 microseconds later, it was intercepted. The relay screens blinked twice. No alarm, no rejection. Instead, the fleet's long-dormant archival receivers, buried within ancient signal redundancy nodes once used to monitor debris drift, activated without permission. An outbound ping pulsed through the belt, bounced off a forgotten Saracen-era weather satellite locked in Lagrange decay. That relay, unregistered, unsupervised, unaccounted for in modern fleet inventory, reflected the deep cast line back toward the flagship. This time, it didn't return raw data. It spoke. Stop watching, start calculating. It wasn't text. It wasn't a signal burst or visual threat display. It was speech, slow, crisp, male, Terran, unfiltered and untranslated. The voice filled every unshielded relay channel across the fleet. It wasn't loud, but it was direct, like someone had walked onto the bridge and set it beside them. The words arrived with no metadata, no origin tags, no ID flags. The fleet AI marked them as non-combat auditory stimulus. No further action suggested. The Bartok moved, not with grace or spectacle. It rotated on microthrusters, manual vectoring so finely tuned it bypassed their angular momentum sensors. It didn't flare engines or adjust drift profiles. It threaded, between sensor thresholds, beneath comms lag. The ship advanced not through speed, but through comprehension, shifting posture based on how the Dominion fleet should respond, not how they were currently reacting. Within moments, the Bartok had repositioned behind two of the forward escort vessels. 3 torpedoes launched, short-range electromagnetic only. No explosive payload. They hit nothing. But within 2 seconds, 6 fleet relays went dead. The torpedoes weren't weapons. They were surgical instruments. Each one overloaded the local intra-ship relay traffic, disrupting the handshake protocols between adjacent vessels. Without direct targeting or damage, those ships vanished from the fleet's command map. No longer enemies, no longer allies. Just zeros in the data stream. The captains aboard those vessels shouted for reintegration, but their requests arrived jumbled. Their timestamps were out of sync. One even read as being issued 12 minutes in the past. Then the cooling loops began to fail. The Bartok's second salvo came as disruption lances. Low-power pulses targeted not at armor or weapons, but at the magnetic exhaust regulators that kept internal heat from breaching structural tolerances. Every Dominion warship used thermal balancers keyed to frequency-locked channels, a standard known to all militaries across 2 sectors. The Bartok had matched those frequencies, then it inverted them. The lances didn't melt anything. They just nudged the systems slightly out of tolerance, long enough to make each ship's reactor cooling unit believe there was an internal fault. Every ship affected responded in the same way. Automated system freeze, not destruction. Pause. A decision forced onto the vessel by its own safety logic. For 30 seconds at a time, those ships were dead in space. While the engineers scrambled to unlock the safeties, the Bartok deployed kinetic decoys, compact shapes launched at high acceleration with no engine trail, no core signature. They registered as physical threats moving to breach. Automated strike bays prepared to deploy countermeasures, but the decoys were rigged with falsified clamp signatures. They mimicked the fleet's own docking command codes. The bays recognized them not as intruders, but as returning allies. Hatches opened mid-lockdown, railguns misfired, hull locks cycled. Then the ship halted all movement. The Bartok was gone from visual, once again drifting in inert posture. On the bridge, Varel stood motionless. A junior engineer shouted across the pit, demanding an explanation. How is he predicting our fault thresholds? How does he know when we'll react? No one answered him, but everyone heard it. The crew knew it now. This wasn't AI. This wasn't random or reactive. Someone was piloting the Bartok and doing it manually. The precision couldn't be algorithmic. It required rhythm, timing, a familiarity with how real officers moved, not how programs thought they should. Whoever sat in that chair had studied the Dominion's tactical behavior, not just protocols but habits. The way crews second-guessed system prompts, the way captains ignored low-priority alerts under stress, the cadence of their drills. He had mapped it, all of it. Varel issued the fallback command: segment fleet logic trees, isolate systems by vessel, sever interdependency. It was a last resort, designed for combating fleet-wide malware incursions. Ships would become independent, but as soon as the command went out, 6 ships failed to receive it. They were already isolated, not by choice, by precision. The Bartok had severed them early, ensuring that fallback would reach only half the fleet. Not enough to coordinate, just enough to keep them confused. One cruiser, Casterin, broke formation. Her captain, acting without confirmation, initiated manual override. The ship pivoted hard, its railguns charging without targeting locks. Its internal systems rejected the shot 3 times. Safety limits. System lag. It didn't matter. The 4th trigger sequence worked, but the Bartok didn't react. It stayed still. The cruiser fired. Nothing hit. Instead, Casterin's own emergency defense systems triggered. Its point defense array misread the outbound kinetic burst as a hostile incoming round, redirected its shield harmonics, and collapsed its forward energy field mid-cycle. Not a breach. A failure. Self-inflicted. The cruiser spun slowly, unable to correct. Not damaged. Just out. No alarm sounded. No enemy fire struck. The kill had come from inside. On the bridge of the flagship, the technician closest to Varel stood back from his console, voice quiet. "He's not fighting us," he said. "He's demonstrating us." They had tried everything: failover overrides, logic tree isolation, full system partitioning, but none of it mattered. Varel had watched his fleet devolve from a coordinated containment force into a scattered field of disabled vessels and frightened operators. They hadn't even been attacked in the conventional sense. Their tools, their logic, their assumptions had all been used against them, like dull knives turned inward. But fear only sharpened pride, and pride made someone try something reckless. The Surekan cruiser Jorvith broke protocol first. Its captain, Commander Halvek, executed a total AI stack override. He disabled targeting heuristics, scrapped signature recognition, shut down safety buffers, and operated the gunnery controls by visual feed alone. Manual alignment, human judgment, line of sight only. Dominion doctrine warned against this for good reason. Vision-based targeting was crude, susceptible to parallax lag and inertia compensation errors. But Halvek had no other option. The Bartok wasn't being recognized by their systems, so he abandoned the systems entirely. He centered the hull visually, locked the slug barrel by hand, and fired. The kinetic round slammed into the Bartok's starboard side with enough force to rip through 3 layers of decommissioned armor. There was no energy burst, no counterfire, just a sudden, ugly impact, clean and brutal. The hull tore jagged from nose to midsection, and for the first time since the engagement had begun, something happened that resembled damage. Panels sheared, debris peeled into slow drift. The Bartok began to roll. Its orientation slackened. Its reactor signature dropped to 0. The lights along its spine went dark, and its signal vanished completely from every relay. Visual, thermal, magnetic. It didn't cloak. It didn't fade. It died. Silence fell across the bridge of the Dominion flagship. A dozen eyes locked on the feed. The Bartok spun in lazy rotation, bleeding a trail of cold gas from the rupture line. For the first time since entering the Dareth Belt, Varel allowed himself to exhale. No enemy could hide thermal bleed at that scale. No stealth package could maintain hull integrity in that state. The ship wasn't posturing. It was broken. 31 seconds passed. Crew chatter resumed in hushed bursts. Analysts reported null signals, radiation decay consistent with reactor bleed-out, and zero movement. Support vessels began querying for boarding permission. Engineers speculated wildly. Was this entire operation a ghost signal trap? Was the Bartok operated remotely from a deeper Terran grid? Had they been fighting a decoy rigged with predictive logic? Varel let them speak. He didn't answer. Part of him still waited. There was a pattern in every move the Bartok had made, strategic, timed, intentional. None of it had been random. None of it had been reactive. And that slug had come from a break in the pattern. It hadn't been part of the dance. It had been blunt force. Something about that bothered him. He authorized partial retrieval. Boarding routes were calculated. Recovery pods were prepped. One of the fleet engineers suggested extraction of the Bartok's logic core to determine how it had bypassed targeting systems. Another requested capture for post-mortem simulation. The crew moved with a kind of hesitant relief. The relief of people who had touched death but now believed it was contained. Then Virel's private comm channel lit up. A direct signal. Not from his command structure. Not from another vessel. From the Bartok. The encryption matched Dominion clearance protocols. Specifically, an officer-level access tag marked Kern-3/Indigo, a classification code last used during the Trelvar cipher wars, and believed lost when Terran systems were purged from interstellar grid recognition. The signal shouldn't have been readable. It shouldn't have even existed. But the voice that came through was clear. Human, calm, male. Now we're even. It wasn't a threat. It wasn't an ultimatum. It was a statement, a sentence spoken not in rage, but in finality. The comms officer froze. Varel didn't speak. He watched the Bartok. The ship came back to life, not gradually, not like a damaged vessel struggling for power. Every system lit in perfect sequence, reignition from nose to stern, lights strobing along the ventral spine, weapon hatches rotating with deliberate timing. This was not recovery. This was unveiling. The Bartok had been holding back. It had played the role of a crippled relic, forcing the Dominion to burn resources, lose formation, collapse internal logic, all without drawing a real weapon. Now it showed what it had been saving. One of the bridge officers gasped as new hardpoints emerged from the Bartok's undercarriage. No standard designs, no Dominion file match. The weapons didn't look Terran. They didn't look modern. They looked targeted. Every node, every turret, every barrel had been shaped around one thing: resonance harmonics. Varel recognized the pattern. Dominion capital ships use gravitational collapse fields as part of their shield integrity. An old innovation, tuned to prevent bleed-through from enemy energy lances. The Bartok had mapped it. Its warhead launch was slow, almost lazy. One round, not rapid fire, not swarm logic. One warhead, tuned by the look of it to a very specific harmonic curve. And it didn't veer. It didn't maneuver. It just moved in a clean line toward the flagship. A shield barrier went up. Auto flares launched. Decoys deployed. None of it mattered. The warhead passed through the defense grid without registering resistance. It wasn't high energy. It wasn't explosive. It was precise, dialed to match the flagship's own harmonic field. The effect wasn't destruction. It was collapse. Mid-hull, during a command transition, the flagship split, clean down the spine like a pressure-fractured dome. One half listed into inertial drift. The other ruptured in slow, almost clinical disassembly. There were no fireballs, no heat bursts, just sudden absence. Varel died mid-order. His voice cut off halfway through a command for tactical fallback. No broadcast followed. The Bartok didn't gloat. It didn't declare anything. It simply powered down again, hovering just above the still smoking remains of the Dominion's command ship. That was the moment the rest of the fleet understood. This hadn't been evasion. It hadn't even been war. This had been judgment, measured, calculated, delivered. The warhead hadn't looked like much. No energy flare, no pulse burst, not even a shimmer from its casing. It moved without resistance, without a visible drive. A silver shape no longer than a fighter's fuselage. gliding across the void with the slow certainty of something that did not care whether it was seen. At first, the Dominion fleet didn't recognize it as a weapon. It wasn't broadcasting threat markers, wasn't emitting radiation, wasn't even tracked by 3 of the 4 remaining tactical AIs. But Varel knew. He saw it in the way the Bartok had gone still again. Not in retreat, but in anticipation. As if the final strike didn't need guidance, just permission. The warhead struck the flagship's central spine without resistance. It passed through the forward shielding array, bypassed the hull's kinetic dampeners, and vanished mid-structure. There was no impact alarm, no damage flare. The flagship systems didn't report a hit because nothing failed. Not immediately. For 4 full seconds, everything remained steady. Then the center deck cracked. Not in explosion, not in fire, in unraveling. The hull split along a seam no one knew existed, beginning at the tertiary command relay and running straight through the reactor's magnetic throat. The noise was internal, subtle, off-frequency, a low structural wail that caused no breach alert, no pressure spike. It simply happened. The bridge went cold first. Power faded from the rails. Command feeds cut mid-ping. Varel stood as the deck beneath him vibrated once, briefly, like the ship had shivered. His lips had just formed the beginning of a fallback command. His voice made it 3 syllables before it cut off. The tears spread down both sides, splitting corridor supports, collapsing access shafts. There was no fire, no decompression storm, just structural disengagement. The kind of failure no enemy could time without having seen the blueprint. Because the warhead had never been built to destroy in the conventional sense. It had been designed, years ago, to destabilize Dominion gravity field harmonics. And it hadn't been stolen. It had been handed over, 30 years prior, during peace. Talks on the outer neutral rings. A joint military transparency initiative. Earth had listened, nodded, taken the files, and vanished from the council soon after. On surviving ships, engineers froze at their consoles. Data feeds warped. Thermal ladders spiked, then flattened. Logic clocks drifted by milliseconds. Not enough to cause damage, just enough to prove that whatever governed their systems no longer applied. It wasn't sabotage, it was design. Collapsed by blueprint. No more strikes came. No secondary payloads. The Bartok didn't advance. It didn't turn. It made no attempt to follow the crippled ships limping away from the field. The shot was never meant to destroy the fleet. It had one target, the flagship, and one outcome, silence. With the fleet command severed, operational chains frayed across what remained. 2 destroyers powered down, drifting without directive. 1 gunship attempted to reinitiate group sync, but the node logic rejected its own encryption codes. Its core protocols had been subtly reclassified mid-transmission, marked non-trusted asset. No warning, no system breach. Just a quiet deletion from its own network. 4 of the ships activated blackout drift, a last resort maneuver designed for disengagement when fleet structure collapsed beyond recovery. No engines, no emissions, no tethers to Cyric and command. They rotated slow and inert, vanishing into the deeper layers of the Dareth Belt's gravitational scatter. No one pursued them. Inside the Resiv, a surviving escort frigate now blind and deaf to command logic, 1 technician tried to initiate a distress ping. The console refused the input. It wasn't jammed. The distress option had been replaced. In its place was a simple line, unformatted, untagged. He waited, not to kill, to show us what not killing looks like. That line appeared again in backup logs, again in flight operations, then in the AI system's diagnostic notes. It wasn't embedded code. It was a message injected through their own archival channels, fed into the layers they never monitored, where systems wrote comments to themselves for efficiency tracking. The Bartok hadn't corrupted their machines. It had simply spoken in their language, at a level no one ever thought to guard. The 6 survivors eventually pulled clear of the kill zone, navigating by manual thruster bursts and magnetic pulse triangulation. No contact from Earth, no Terran vessel on sensors. Nothing chased them, but their logs were full, not of damage reports, not of threats, of that one sentence. It repeated in the flight recorders. It printed itself into every recovery system, every self-test, every integrity scan. Wherever a Dominion officer tried to assert control, it was there. He waited, not to kill, to show us what not killing looks like. And the Bartok remained in the belt, still drifting, still inert, not a warning, a reminder. The Dareth belt remained quiet for 3 standard cycles after the Bartok ceased all movement. No recovery ships entered the zone. No council observers arrived. No transmissions were exchanged. The silence was not one of forgetfulness. It was calculated. Every surviving ship from the Dominion fleet had initiated deep blackout drift, removing themselves from grid presence, disabling all identification protocols, and purging system memory from the moment of Bartok's engagement. Not a single commander dared transmit the raw logs, not because they feared reprisal, but because no one wanted to be the first to admit what had happened. 12 ships entered the belt. 9 were left disabled, their systems shattered from the inside. 1 was gone, split cleanly in 2, and the last 2 had vanished into blind drift, out of formation, out of contact, not to escape the Bartok, but to escape the shame of what their systems had allowed. Earth made no comment. No footage was denied, no information scrubbed. But nothing was acknowledged either. There were no claims of victory, no press conferences, no diplomatic fallout. The Serekan Dominion waited, cautiously assembling a post-event classification panel under internal authority. Analysts reviewed the logs under restricted protocols, the ship movements, the signal overrides, the resonance tuning. Every piece of it was real, traceable, confirmable. But the actions themselves didn't fit any threat taxonomy. The Bartok hadn't executed a campaign. It hadn't broadcast intent. It had waited, observed, and dismantled a structure that had not been prepared to classify intent, that wasn't hostile, but wasn't passive either. At the highest levels of military archives, the incident received a designation, K-71, originally filed under Partial Fleet Catastrophe Unknown External. It was proposed to be named Isolated Mythic Response, a label typically reserved for phenomena that breached doctrine comprehension but posed no replicable threat. The term was rejected. This had not been myth, it had been method. Investigators traced the Bartok's pilot's signature through reconstructed telemetry. One identifier emerged, repeated at irregular intervals deep within the ship's logic handshake. IK-43 Kern. Cross-referenced, it led to Commander Isak Kern, former officer in Earth's Signal Corps, presumed dead during the Trelvar Cipher Wars. A conflict Earth had quietly disengaged from without explanation. Kern had disappeared after his squadron went dark on the edge of the neutral zones. He had been listed MIA, no wreckage, no logs, no farewell message. Now, 3 decades later, his signal pulsed through a ship that had never truly decommissioned. He had not returned to war. He had become the war. Fleet analysts uncovered something more unsettling. The Bartok's interface logs showed no secondary AI activity. Every response, every tactical move, every system reclassification had originated from a single command thread, unbroken, unforked. It had not been issued from a cockpit or bridge. It had been run within the ship's foundational logic structure. Kern had hardwired himself into the Bartok. Whether by mind-machine interface, partial neural sync, or a more permanent method, no one could say. But he hadn't piloted it like a ship. He had inhabited it. He had watched from inside, silently calibrating Dominion signal logic, command protocol, fleet drills, signal timing, engineering rhythms. For decades, not preparing to retaliate, not planning to strike, just waiting for a moment when the right shape of misunderstanding would arrive. And when it did, he acted. Not to kill, to demonstrate. A final scene, years later, unfolded at the Dominion's High Strategic War College, Sector 12, Outer Colony Rim. A lecture hall full of cadets reviewed archived simulation footage, partial feeds, redacted sequences, system collapse diagrams. The event had become curriculum, not as an engagement, as a question. The instructor, a senior fleet survivor, now turned doctrine analyst, replayed the 31-second blackout following the slug impact, the moment when the Bartok had gone dead, before Kern reactivated and delivered the final strike. The feed stopped on the moment before reignition. He turned to the room. Who can classify this event by known combat types? No one answered. He scanned the room. Cadets stared in silence. Finally, one raised a hand. We call it psychological deterrence, correct? Strategic misclassification? The instructor shook his head once. No, he said. This wasn't deterrence. This wasn't misdirection. Another cadet asked, quieter this time. Then what was it, sir? The veteran let the pause stretch. He looked not at the screen, but beyond it, toward a memory that refused to age. Never assume the quiet ship is empty, he said. It may just be thinking. That line found its way into operational briefings, into fleet drills, into doctrine reviews. It became a permanent tag in the threat recognition matrix, not assigned to a species, a vessel class, or a known weapon, but to a behavior, a human behavior. And on the edge of the Dareth belt, the Bartok still drifted, not broken, not watching, just thinking. Tell us what you think in the comments. Was Commander Kern a hero, a ghost, or a warning? Drop your thoughts below and join the conversation. And if this story gripped you, hit subscribe for more thrilling HFY tales